They expected death. They had been told that capture meant shame, dishonor, and worse. For young Japanese women who had spent the war serving as clerks, typists, telephone operators, or nurses for the imperial forces, surrender was unthinkable. And yet, in the summer of 1945, thousands found themselves in American hands. Instead of execution, there was transport. Instead of humiliation, there was confinement. And inside the barbed wire of prisoner-of-war camps across the United States, something extraordinary unfolded. The surrender of Japan was total, absolute, and devastating. Cities were ash and rubble. Families had been scattered by fire and hunger. The myths of the empire, that loyalty would guarantee victory, that sacrifice was noble, that enemies were less than human, had collapsed in the blinding light over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Among the prisoners taken overseas were not just soldiers, but women who had lived in the shadow of the war machine. Some had been trained as clerks in the Imperial Navy's communications units. Others had been auxiliaries in supply depots or military hospitals. They were daughters of a nation raised on Bushido, but their uniforms were paper-thin in the face of defeat. They had been warned. Americans were demons. Capture meant dishonor, violence, degradation. Many carried secret bottles of poison to avoid such fates. But when the doors of their transport ships opened, they found something different. Soap, hot showers, real food. Letters and diaries smuggled out of the camps tell us what this meant. One woman described peeling an orange for the first time in years, the juice running down her hands. She had not tasted such sweetness since childhood. Another wrote of the shock of sleeping on a mattress instead of a straw mat, and of how her body ached not from fear, but from rest. Another noted that the guards addressed them not as enemies, but as ladies. The war had taught them to expect cruelty. The captivity offered them dignity. Take the story of Shizuko Tanaka, 20 years old, who had worked as a typist for the army in Manila. She had been told to destroy every file, every photograph, every record before surrender. Her last act of service was burning paper until the flames licked her hands. When she boarded the ship bound for America, she whispered to herself that she would never again see the plum blossoms of her hometown. Or consider Keiko Nakamura, a nurse's aide who had spent the final months of the war treating boys no older than herself. Their wounds seared into her memory. When she arrived at a camp in Texas, she was stunned to find bandages, medicine, and clean water waiting. Not for her patients, but for her. And there was Yumi Sato, raised in the imperial port city of Yokosuka, who had dreamed of becoming a teacher. She had been assigned instead to sort naval codes. In captivity, she found herself teaching Japanese to curious American guards who wanted to understand the language of their former enemy. Two revelations shaped their captivity. The first came in a headline. Newspapers that filtered into the camps carried photographs of Japan in ruins. For the first time, many of these women saw the scale of the destruction at home. Cities they once knew, Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, were smoldering ruins. Their families might be gone, their homes erased. The war had already taken more from them than captivity ever could. The second revelation came in a letter. Some were allowed to write home, and when replies trickled back, they discovered that their loved ones, too, had been deceived by propaganda. Parents and siblings had believed these women were lost forever. That they were still alive, eating well, and treated with humanity in America was a shock almost impossible to fathom. There were still moments of bitterness. Some prisoners wept at night, ashamed that they had lived while others died. Some could not reconcile the kindness of their captors with the image of Americans as destroyers. And many carried deep scars, memories of firebombings, of famine, of the long collapse of a dream they had been raised to believe was eternal. But captivity offered them one last paradox. In defeat, they discovered a fragile kind of freedom. The climax came with the decision of repatriation. By 1946 and 1947, ships ferried them back across the Pacific. Many wept not with relief, but with dread. They had grown used to food, safety, and dignity in the camps. What would await them in a Japan of rubble and ration lines? Shizuko carried back a small bar of American soap, wrapped in cloth. She later told her children it was the most precious object she ever owned, not for its use, but for what it symbolized. Keiko returned to nursing, her memories of captivity shaping her quiet conviction that compassion was stronger than any weapon. Yumi did become a teacher. She told her students about code books and camp fences, but also about kindness where she least expected it. This is the legacy of their captivity, that even in the shadow of war, humanity can survive. That the simplest acts, a bar of soap, a piece of fruit, a clean bed, can carry meaning deeper than any ideology. And that for these young Japanese women, prisoners in a foreign land, survival was not just about endurance. It was about rediscovering what it meant to be human.